Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Qwizical's Guide to with me, Qwizical. And today we will be looking at what do I make the blank. If you can't work that out, that's it. That question mark represents a blank. So what's important when you're thinking about what to make a blank? Sometimes with a lot of bonuses, you don't get a choice with what to make the blank because there is, maybe only a few playable options and there really isn't too much to choose. You either play the bonus or you don't, but very occasionally you will come across a scenario where you can make the blank one of several different letters, and sometimes your move decision can also be influenced by how useful the blank tile is and what it gives back to your opponent. So you may also sacrifice points in order to make the blank something more complicated. So we'll be looking at a really simple example today. Really simple. I've got a new headset. Yay! So hopefully the sound is coming out fine on this. If nobody likes the sound, please tell me, and I will have a tweak. But anyway, here is an example opening rag that you may or may not get. I'd be really happy if I had this as an opening rack, but I wish it came later in the game. But what should we think about making the blank here? Of course, it's obvious that we're going to bonus, but what should we make the blank here? Now, I may have already gone over what you should think about blanks with in one of my other videos, particularly about bonus spotting, or bingo spotting, depending on which part of the world you're from. And of course, I said at that point, to look for the bonuses, you start with E's and S's. Now, of course, with the E bonuses here, we've got all these retains bonuses, and of course the S position there isn't the best. But in this situation, if we're trying to be more defensive, not that you would at this stage of the game, but if you were trying to be more defensive, what would you want to make the blank? Well, you would want to make the blank ideally one of the other letters on your rack. So for example, we want to give away the least amount of floaters available to our opponent, and if we're going to play 7 tiles, we need to make sure that we duplicate those letters to make sure that the opponent maybe gets one less letter that they're able to play a bonus through. So what I mean is, let's say our opponent is, say, holding maybe a rack that only goes with E, O and A. Let's say, just an example, as the only vowels. So if we were to give them all of those options, they then have the choice of which bonus to play. Whereas if we give them fewer of those options, they may either miss the bonus or not be able to play it at all. So here, ideally we want to make the blank either a T and R, an A, an I, an N, or another S. But of course we don't want this S to be on the centre square, because that's not a good idea. And of course we need to make sure that we follow, in this particular example, the opening move ideas, not putting vowels next to the double letter squares, not stopping a word one short of the triple in case it's got a front hook. But a move such as anti-R's, we've duplicated the A's, the S isn't in a very friendly position. That an A is, it's duplicating the letters. It's a good shout, does what we want to do. Also, something like transit, of course not in this position. Transit. Or we could otherwise go for a word like straint. That also duplicates the T's. Of course, ideally, you don't want to put a T. So, for example, with straint in either position, any bonus around the T is going to hit the doubles, whereas any bonus around this T up here would not hit doubles. And if you can, you could put the letters close together. The two duplicate letters closer together, which will kind of prevent your opponent from picking one over the other and scoring lots over one. But that doesn't really matter. You're giving them the same floater, and that's not such a great thing. Now, the reason I chose this example is because what if the rack doesn't have any letters that you could duplicate? What if this rack, you can't make the blank any of those other letters on your rack, so you have to have 7 unique letters for your bonus? Well, you want to make it the most complicated letter you can. You want to make it the one that your opponent is hardly ever going to have a bonus around. And those letters are often the highest scoring letters in Scrabble. So for example, the J, the Q, the X, the Z, the K, W's, V's, Y's, F's, H's, those are the kind of letters that become really, really hard to bonus around. And sometimes it also depends on the positioning of the word on the board to which letters would be harder to bonus around. So for example, a word beginning with Y would be a lot harder to make than a word ending in Y. Likewise with a B, a word ending in B is really unlikely, but a word starting with B is going to be a lot more likely. So you've got to think about the position of the word on the board. So going back to what I said about really complicated letters with this rack, of course you're not always going to be able to make the blanks Q's, X's, J's or Z's. But in this situation we can play a word like Kintars. So we've made the blank a Q. Our opponent is very, very, very unlikely to have a bonus through that Q. You'd have to be pretty unlucky if your opponent could only bonus around that Q. But it happens. But that's why sometimes you've got to make the blanks duplicate letters, and why sometimes when you've got so much choice, you really have to think about sometimes maybe defensiveness or some other aspect of the bonus other than just the score, because all these bonuses are really going to score 64 points. It's just a matter of which you play, and with all the choice that's out there, you've really got to consider what that 7th letter is going to be, because it's not so obvious. So on to the summary. Where is it? It's here. In summary, duplicate the letters. So if you're holding trains in a blank, make the blank TRAINS. If you're holding retain in a blank, consider making it an I or an N or some other letter on that rack. Of course, a lot of these decisions will be based on the board at the time and have a load of other factors which I cannot cover in a hopefully very short video. Point number 2, avoid making the blank an S and an E, especially if those letters are not already on your rack. And why is that? Well, S's and E's are pretty much the most common letters in the English language, and as such they become the easiest letters to get a bonus around. And those are the letters that you will rarely see floating on a board. Now, we say floating. They're not like magical levitating tiles. They're just available to be played around. They're just called floaters. That needs no more explaining. Point number 3. Which letters are useful as the floaters? Now, this could be useful to you or useful to your opponent. Sometimes, depending on the stage of the game, it may be better to have a floating vowel instead of a floating consonant. So, for example, if there are loads and loads of vowels left in the bag, you may decide that making the blank a vowel will be less useful to your opponent than making the blank a consonant. Likewise, maybe the Q is still unseen and you could potentially make your blank an I or a U. It may be that, thinking about it, you could potentially give away a place to play that Q. So you've always got to think about which letters you can make your blank, and if there are any other letters that you could potentially make it, to just consider it, think about all the options, and then play which one seems right. And the final point, the high value letters are the best to play as your blanks. Of course, they're not going to score that as blanks, because otherwise everybody would be making their blank a Q. But the idea behind that is that they're the letters that you hardly ever see in a bonus word. Probably the Z is maybe the most common that I've ever seen in a bonus. Q's are really difficult to put in. So if you make blanks Q's, J's, X's, and even Z's, it's just like one of those useless floaters that you can't really play around. So it's not something you have to worry about when you play. You know, you can leave it floating, and the chances of it actually being useful as a bonus is pretty slim. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I hope I explained things well, and I hope the mic works. But anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next time for more of Qwizical's Guides 2. Bye!